This time on Faith Journal, we're going to go inside Israel in a way you've not seen it before. With me will be guest Farrah Aviva, who's a co-host and producer of a new documentary called The Original Promise. In The Original Promise, we get to see a different side of Israel, one that's far from the newspaper headlines. It's the Israel that people in Israel love. It's not the one that's portrayed in popular Western media. This time with me, Farrah Aviva is going to examine that, explain it to us, and show us some of the statistics and information about Israel. It is an interesting country. Let me show you first a clip from it right here.
This is the country where there is the biggest gap between what I thought about it and what I saw in reality, right? And then when I ask them, what do you mean? What was this gap about? They start saying, you know, I expected it to be really dangerous.
Welcome to Faith Journal Forum. Hello, I'm Richard Lando. This time we're going to look at the Promised Land, Israel. And with me is a guest who's a co-host of a program recently made about Israel. Farrah Aviva, welcome.
Hi.
It's good to have you here. Now, this television program, this documentary you made, I should say, The Original Promise, is quite interesting. And to familiarize our viewers with it, we'll open with a brief clip taken from the program, and then we're going to talk about it. We'll show it to you right here.
Some guy shooting some guy, so he's the bad guy. It's not always like that.
But some guy's shooting is what the world sees on TV, sometimes night after night. It's not that it doesn't happen. Sadly, it does. It's not all inaccurate. It's just, it's not all there is.
The real Israel is modern society. People struggle to make a living. Democratic, liberal, pretty not different than many other states or countries that we know.
So, what do you want to comment on that clip?
Well, I think that sums up exactly what we were trying to accomplish with our film, is to dispel all the misconceptions that there are about Israel. I think the media constantly shows a one-sided view, not necessarily one-sided view, but it's full of half-truths. And so people are missing out on what Israel is all about, and it's what we wanted to showcase in our film.
Well, why did you feel compelled to make this documentary in the first place?
I feel like I didn't have a choice by the way it happened. It was amazing what had happened. It's a bit of a story. I used to work in the fashion industry in New York, and I thought for the longest time that was my passion, my love. I never thought I would move back home to Vancouver. I was in love with New York, and one day, I got stabbed in my heart with a truth that I couldn't ignore, and it was the fact that I wanted to be in film and television, and I only ever went into fashion because I was too scared to, and it was devastating to me, but exciting. And before I decided to pack up all my stuff, I had this conversation with God. It was one of the most spiritual moments that I ever had in my life up until that point. And I asked him, I was like, if this is him telling me to do this, to please guide me and
give me a sign.
Give me a sign. And he knows that the more I do, the more successful I am in my life, the more I'm able to help everyone else. It's just the principle that I live my life by. And so I told God that if I was doing this, that I wanted it to have a benefit on the rest of the world, and for projects that I work on, for it to benefit something, you know? It's not about chasing stardom. And 3 weeks after I moved back to Vancouver, just 3 weeks in, I was put in contact with Doug Coy, who's the producer and the host of this movie. And he told me what he was doing, and he was saying he needed a co-host, and I knew, I just found it fascinating that the first project that God was giving me, before I even had any experience, was something for Israel. And to me, I was like, that's it. That's what I'm supposed to start on. And I was completely compelled, scared, because I lived a lot of my life quite embarrassed to be Jewish, but...
Well, you grew up where?
In Kelowna.
Yeah, there's not a huge Jewish culture. I grew up in Montreal, where there's a large Jewish culture, but in Kelowna, I can understand what have its challenges.
Yeah, I was pretty much the only Jewish kid in school in my class, and I would always, around Christmas time and Easter time, I would just stay quiet. Hopefully no one would ask me. I didn't want to stick out like a sore thumb. And it was hard, like identity-wise, like you don't feel like you can embrace who you are. And as you got older, for me, it got harder because when people found out I was Jewish, the jokes started. And the easiest...
They're not jokes.
Well, I told myself they were to help
Yeah.
the pain, you know, like really, and I would just laugh it off. But inside, like it hurt, and it really affected me. And going to Israel is what allowed me. Going back to why I was compelled to do it, I was scared to do it because I felt like I was a failure in Judaism. Like, why would you want me to be a part of this project? And it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
There you go, and you were directed to it. You know, I went to Israel in '83, and the thing that struck me, and everybody says it, but when you're there, it strikes you as how tiny Israel is. And you talk about this in your documentary. It's like the size of Nova Scotia minus Cape Breton.
Yeah.
And you travel the length and breadth of the country, or the tiny width of it in an hour or so, and you say to yourself, how is it this tiny little piece of land upset the entire world? What's your observation about that?
It baffles my mind. I mean, it's like this tiny country behind all the headlines, like all the big headlines. And why? I don't know. I mean, I have my ideas, but I think that Israel is in a media war right now, and what's being shown on TV isn't necessarily true. I mean, they have even non-supporters of Israel are now making films about Israel, trying to get more anti-Israelis. And I think that there's just a lack of truth out there. No one ever focuses on the people of Israel, the soul, the passion, what drives that country, what they're really doing for the rest of the world. It's all focused on the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and even in those circumstances, not the whole truth is being told.
Yeah. I just want to extract from your documentary that we extracted this part where you talked about tiny Israel, how small it is. I'm going to show that right now. Please take a look.
What struck me in a big way is how small Israel is.
Israel is so small. To make people understand how small Israel is, from east to west, it's half hour. From north to south, it's 6 hours. I'm talking about in an average car.
Small distances, but huge opportunities.
You can go in January skiing up north, drive 6 hours, and go scuba diving 30 degrees Celsius down south.